I stood there trembling, not from fear, but humiliation. My mother-in-law, Patricia Monroe, spat in my face in front of the whole family. "You'll never be one of us," she hissed. "You're nothing. Just low-class trash." I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into her world, scrubbing her floors, cooking her meals, smiling through her jabs. I gave up my dream job in Chicago, moved to this small Oregon town for her son, and never asked for anything in return. But that moment shattered something inside me. I refused to be trampled on any longer. What Patricia didn't know was that my late father had left me an empire in silence. And now I have the power to burn every bridge she built with a smile. When I first met Patricia Monroe, my future mother-in-law, she smiled at me with lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. That should have been my first warning. But love is blind, deaf, and dangerously naive. I had fallen for her son Daniel so deeply, so wholly, that I convinced myself her coldness was just formality. It wasn't. It was a forecast. When we married, Daniel wanted us to move from Chicago to his hometown of Ashland, Oregon. I resisted at first. I had a good job at an interior design firm, a growing reputation, and friends who knew the real me. But he insisted it would be temporary. "Just until Mom settles," he said. "She needs us, and she likes you deep down." So I said goodbye to everything: my career, my independence, my familiar city lights, and followed him into the quiet shadows of the Monroe family home. I didn't just move in, I folded myself in. I became small to fit the mold of what she expected. I wore muted colors, tied my hair back, neatly learned her casserole recipes, and never raised my voice. I did everything I could to prove I was worthy of her son. But Patricia didn't want a daughter-in-law. She wanted a servant she could mold, someone to look down on and control. And I, Clara Morgan, gave her exactly that. It started small, condescending compliments. "Oh, that's a cute little purse, must be from a street market." Then came the subtle sabotage, recooking my meals before guests arrived, rearranging my furniture, telling her friends I meant well but had no taste. The worst part: Daniel never stood up for me. He told me to let it go, that she's just old school, that it's not worth the fight. So I let it go. I let it go when she threw out the birthday cake I baked her and replaced it with store-bought. I let it go when she said I looked too plump to wear white at our wedding. I let it go when she told me after dinner one night, "You'll never be a Monroe. You don't come from Monroes." I tried harder. I made excuses for her in my head. Maybe she had a hard life. Maybe she resents losing Daniel's attention. Maybe she just doesn't know how to show love. I gave her my time, my labor, my grace. I took care of her when she had back surgery, sponge bathing her while she called me a burden to her recovery. I stayed up at night massaging her feet while she bragged on the phone about how lazy young women are these days. And every single time I thought maybe this will be the moment she sees me. But Patricia saw everything, she just didn't care. The more I gave, the more she took. And the more I bled, the more she smiled. She had one golden rule: her son came first, and that meant I came last. Daniel, to his credit, was kind, but not brave. I suppose I was never asking him to fight for me. I was asking him to see me, but he couldn't or wouldn't. And that realization carved a quiet hole in my chest that widened every time I swallowed my pride in the name of peace. Still, I said nothing. I stayed quiet when she redrew our household budget to limit what I was allowed to spend on groceries. I bit my tongue when she told guests I wasn't working because I lacked ambition. I smiled through clenched teeth when she showed up uninvited to our anniversary dinner and ordered Daniel to change the wine. I played along, always the gracious daughter-in-law, always the eager to please Clara, because I thought if I just endured long enough, she would change. And even if she didn't, maybe Daniel would open his eyes one day and defend me. Maybe he'd remember the woman he fell in love with, the woman who once painted entire studio walls in barefoot defiance, who had dreams and fire and edges. Maybe he'd remind his mother that I wasn't some timid shadow. I was his partner. But neither of them did. And the longer I stayed in that house, the more I disappeared. I barely recognized the woman in the mirror anymore. My voice, once filled with design pitches and big city ambitions, had withered into a whisper of "yes, ma'am," and "I understand." My hands were no longer sketching blueprints, they were scrubbing toilets I didn't use. And still I stayed. Because I believed that love meant sacrifice. I believed that good women endure. I believed that if I just waited long enough, the reward would be acceptance, dignity, respect. What I didn't realize was this: there are people in this world who will take everything you have and still demand more. And Patricia Monroe was one of them. So I smiled through cracked pride. I folded laundry that wasn't mine. I kept a meal warm for a husband who didn't ask if I'd eaten. I ignored the snickers at family gatherings, the stories told about me like I wasn't in the room. I collected all of these small betrayals and stacked them neatly inside my ribcage like stones. Until one night, one dinner, one moment, one spit in my face, everything would come crashing down. And I would finally see Patricia not as a mother-in-law, but as the beginning of my awakening. It was supposed to be a celebration. Daniel had just received a major promotion at the bank, and Patricia insisted on hosting a family dinner at her home, her kingdom. She called it a simple gathering, but I knew better. When Patricia arranged an evening, it wasn't just a meal, it was a test, and I, as always, would be the one on trial. I cooked for 2 days straight. Roasted duck with orange glaze, wild mushroom risotto, almond torte for dessert, all from scratch. I knew she'd find something to criticize, but I couldn't help myself. I still wanted to impress her to prove I belonged. I wore a soft navy dress, ironed it twice. I curled my hair the way Daniel once said he liked it. I even wore the pearl earrings Patricia had given me years ago, the only time she'd ever handed me anything with a smile. I still held on to the hope that tonight might be different. Foolish, I know, but sometimes hope is a habit that dies slower than pride. The guests arrived, Daniel's cousins, a few close friends of the Monroe family. Patricia swept into the room like royalty, dressed in one of her signature beige suits, her perfume so thick it made my eyes sting. She kissed Daniel's cheek, then turned to me with a tight smile and said, "Let's try not to embarrass ourselves tonight." That was her greeting. Dinner began well enough. People were chatting, eating, praising the food. Daniel beamed with pride as everyone congratulated him. I sat quietly nodding, smiling, sipping wine. I was used to fading into the background. Then came the moment that cracked everything wide open. One of Daniel's cousins lifted his fork, nodded toward the risotto, and said, "Clara, this is amazing. You made this." Before I could answer, Patricia leaned in loud enough for everyone to hear and said with a chuckle, "Well, Clara tries her best. You know how these things are. She's not exactly refined." The table went silent for a beat. My stomach sank. I opened my mouth to respond, but Daniel touched my hand under the table. A gentle squeeze, the same old signal. "Let it go." I looked around. Everyone had that awkward, polite smile on their faces, pretending not to have heard. But I had heard. I had bled for this family, and she had the gall to shame me in my own food. Still, I smiled. "I'm glad you liked it," I said softly. That should have been the end of it. But then Patricia stood up. "I think we need to stop pretending," she announced, holding her wine glass as if she were toasting something sacred. "Let's not forget where we come from. Some of us built this family, some of us were born into class, and others," she turned to me, eyes sharp as knives, "are just passing through." I froze. No one stopped her. Daniel didn't speak. No one reached out. It was as if they were all waiting for her next move. She walked behind me slowly, her heels clicking like a ticking clock. Then, with a calculated pause, she leaned forward and whispered into my ear, but loudly enough for the room to catch every word. "You'll never be one of us, Clara. You're low class. You always have been. You just married well." And then, God help me, she spat in my face. A hot, wet slap of shame. I gasped, recoiling, my hands trembling. My vision blurred not from the spit, but from the sheer heat of humiliation burning in my chest. The room fell into stunned silence. Daniel stood, but not to defend me, only to grab a napkin. "Oh, Mom," he muttered weakly, "that was too far. Too far." That's all he had to say. No one yelled. No one demanded she apologize. No one stormed out in protest. They just watched me wipe her spit from my cheek like I was some nuisance that had interrupted their evening. I looked at Patricia. Her expression was smug. Triumphant? She had finally done it, stripped me of any last shred of dignity, and no one had stopped her. I stood slowly, my knees unsteady, but my voice when it came was calm, hollow, distant. "Thank you for the dinner," I said. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the wine in her face like the old Clara might have. I simply walked away. I walked out of that room, down the front steps, and into the cold Oregon night with my head held high, because something had shifted. Something inside me had snapped so quietly, it felt almost like relief. I drove back home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. When I reached the house, I walked straight to the bedroom, peeled off the stained dress, and threw it in the trash. Then I sat at the edge of my bed and stared at the floor for what felt like hours. I thought of my father, of how he had told me just before he passed, "There will come a day when someone will try to bury you. That's when you remember they're only planting the seed." That night, I unlocked the safe deposit box he'd left me, the one I had forgotten about, the one I hadn't dared touch since his death. And what I found inside changed everything. I had been buried. But now, I was ready to bloom. The night after Patricia spat in my face, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the shallow rhythm of Daniel's breathing beside me, a man who had watched his mother humiliate me and said nothing. My skin still felt sticky from the shame even after I had scrubbed my face raw. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, her lips curling in contempt, her voice thick with superiority, the silence of the room as everyone chose politeness over justice. And then, like a sudden lightning bolt through the fog, I remembered. The safe deposit box. My father had mentioned it once just before his health deteriorated. I was 25 at the time, just finishing grad school too, consumed with my new life and engagement to listen closely. He had said, if things ever go dark, baby girl, if the world forgets your worth, open the box. That's when you'll need to remember who you really are. At the time, I'd laughed it off as sentimental dramatic. My father, Harold Morgan, was a proud man, a quiet builder. He had grown up with nothing and left behind a modest but growing construction business when he passed away. At least that's what I believed. But now, after what Patricia did, after the way I had let myself vanish into their world, I needed to remember who I really was. At 6:45 a.m., before Daniel had even stirred, I showered, dressed, and left the house. I drove through the misty Oregon morning to the Wells Fargo branch in Medford, the one my father had banked with for over 30 years. I walked in with trembling hands and asked to access the safe deposit box under his name. The manager raised an eyebrow. You're listed as the sole heir and co-signer, she confirmed after verifying my ID. It's been untouched for almost 6 years. 6 years. 6 years I could have known. She escorted me to the private vault room, and I stared at the slim metal drawer as she slid it open. It looked ordinary, like something that might hold birth certificates or old receipts. But when I lifted the lid, my breath caught. Inside were folders neatly labeled and a leather-bound journal I instantly recognized. My father's. There were deeds to properties I'd never heard of. One in Aspen, two in Seattle, a mixed-use building in Portland, each with his name and now mine. Stocks, too. Some from companies I vaguely remembered hearing about: Tesla, Apple, Berkshire Hathaway. Original purchase years 1999, 2001, 2005. The numbers, even at a glance, didn't just suggest wealth, they screamed it. Tucked underneath it all was a sealed envelope. I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside, a handwritten letter. My Clara, if you're reading this, it means the world has taken something from you. Maybe your voice, maybe your light, but never forget you were never meant to live small. You were never meant to bow to anyone. I kept this wealth quiet because I wanted you to grow without its shadow, but now it's yours. Use it when you need to stand tall. Use it when they forget who you are. Love, always, Dad. I pressed the paper to my lips and sobbed, not because of the money, but because even from the grave, he had believed in me more than anyone living. In that moment, something inside me surged. For the first time in years, I felt something other than shame or exhaustion. I felt fire. I walked out of that vault different, no longer invisible, no longer silent. I drove home, the fog lifting, as the sun began to pierce the clouds, and with every mile, a plan started to form. I didn't need to confront Patricia, not yet. I didn't need to tell Daniel. Not now. Power doesn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it slips in quietly and waits. Over the next few days, I quietly contacted lawyers, transferred deeds, met with a financial advisor. My father's assets had grown into a substantial empire, easily worth over $7.5 million, not including the property's appreciating values. I opened new accounts in my maiden name, reinstated the Morgan design identity I had buried when I got married, and I bought back the downtown Chicago brownstone that had once been my father's first project. Patricia was busy planning her next ladies' luncheon. Daniel was busy worrying about golf clubs and promotions. And I was rebuilding the empire I had unknowingly inherited. Every lunch I made for Patricia, every insult I absorbed, every errand she barked at me, it became easier. Because while she saw me as her son's obedient little wife, I was sitting on multiple real estate portfolios and negotiating a 6-figure investment into a boutique hotel chain. She thought she had crushed me. She had only awakened me. And as I watched her sip coffee on our back porch one morning, smug and self-assured, I smiled. She would never see it coming. But when she did, she would remember this day. The day I brought her coffee with a smile and fire in my veins. From the outside, nothing changed. I still wore the same modest sweaters Patricia preferred. I still let her criticize the way I folded laundry or arranged flowers. I still cooked dinner at 6 and made sure Daniel's shirts were starched just how he liked them. I smiled. I nodded. I played the part. But inside, Clara Morgan had awakened. Every insult she hurled, every eye roll she thought I didn't see, every bless your heart drenched in sarcasm, it all rolled off me like water now, because I wasn't trapped anymore. I was building something she couldn't see, something she could never touch. In secret, I reclaimed my name. I reactivated my LLC Morgan Design Solutions. The paperwork was processed quietly, and I used a private P.O. box address in Portland. I didn't tell Daniel, I didn't tell a soul. Not because I feared they'd stop me, but because silence was my weapon now. Let them keep underestimating me. Through a discreet law firm in Chicago, I began restructuring my father's holdings, liquidating a few smaller assets, reinvesting in commercial properties with higher yield. Every step I took felt like breathing life back into the woman I'd buried. The confident, brilliant, stubborn woman my father raised. The woman I once was. I hired a virtual assistant, then a property manager, then a design consultant. I made calls from the car-typed contracts in the guest bedroom, signed leases, while pretending to be shopping for groceries. No one questioned me, because no one expected me to be capable of anything beyond wiping counters. Patricia especially. She thought she'd won, that I had accepted my place at the bottom of her pyramid, grateful just to be included in her perfect little Monroe world. And I let her believe that. I let her bask in her illusion while I acquired 3 commercial buildings, expanded my interior firm to 2 states, and partnered with an up-and-coming architect in Austin to develop luxury apartments. I kept the house clean, but I was also managing portfolios that could buy and sell this house 5 times over. The irony made me smile every time she scolded me for forgetting to fluff the pillows. One day, I watched her from across the living room as she sat on the couch bragging on speakerphone to her bridge club friends. She has no ambition, she was saying, sipping tea, but she's sweet. Some girls are just meant to be caretakers, not career women. And I just kept wiping the coffee table, humming under my breath. If only she knew I had just finalized the acquisition of a 10-unit building in San Diego that morning. I wasn't just working, I was thriving. I started attending conferences again. At first, I told Daniel they were design expos. He didn't ask questions. Why would he? I had been trained so well to explain myself with soft tones and empty reassurances. But the truth, I was re-entering the business world with a quiet vengeance. I walked into those rooms as Clara Morgan, not Clara Monroe. And they saw me. They respected me. My proposals were signed, my confidence returned, and within months, my projects were featured in industry blogs. Each day I spent in Patricia's home playing housemaid and dutiful wife, I was also sharpening my blade. One night, Daniel came home worried. "They're talking about layoffs at the bank," he said, loosening his tie. "I might get pushed out." Patricia acted as if the sky had fallen. "No son of mine will be unemployed," she snapped. "You'll move in with me and we'll figure it out." Not we, never we. In her mind, I didn't count. But I did. And I had already planned for this. Over the next few weeks, I offered subtle suggestions to Daniel. "Maybe we should downsize," I said gently one morning over coffee. "We could look into real estate," I said another evening. "You've always been good with numbers." He smiled, distracted. "You really think I could manage property?" I kissed his cheek. "You'd be brilliant." Of course, I had no intention of letting him manage mine. But if he thought the idea came from him, it gave me time, space, control. I created a separate account for the trust fund I began building under my maiden name. Quietly, methodically, I funded it until it held enough for 3 generations. I made sure it was ironclad, untouchable without my consent. And still, I cooked dinner every night. Still, I scrubbed the baseboards. Still, I let Patricia call me that little helper. Because vengeance, I'd come to learn, doesn't always come in fire. Sometimes it comes in silence, in paperwork, in perfectly timed signatures, in deeds with your name on them, and theirs nowhere in sight. Sometimes revenge is letting the storm build, while you hum lullabies to the ones who brought the rain. By the end of that year, Clara Morgan was quietly one of the wealthiest women in the county. And Patricia? She still thought I was the help. But a reckoning was coming. And when it arrived, it would come not with screaming, but with a key. It started with a phone call. Daniel's voice was unusually flat. "Mom's freaking out," he said. "They're calling in the second mortgage." I blinked. I thought she paid that off years ago. No, he sighed. Turns out she's been borrowing against the house for months. Bridge club drama medical bills, and get this, plastic surgery consultations. Now the bank wants their money. She needs a co-signer. I stared out the window, heart calm as lake water. I didn't say anything right away. Then Daniel added, she asked if we could help. Of course she did. For decades, Patricia Monroe had lorded over me like a queen, issuing commands, judgments, and insults with the entitlement of someone born into granite wealth. Now her empire was crumbling, and she needed a lifeline. And like a final cruel joke, she was turning to the very woman she spat on. The irony was almost poetic. I could have told Daniel the truth right then. I could have revealed that I had enough in liquid assets to buy and sell her home 4 times over, that I was already involved in 3 major developments along the West Coast and sat on more real estate than the entire Monroe family ever had. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I smiled. Sure, I said sweetly. Have her come over. She arrived in a panic the next morning, eyes red-rimmed from crying, but still holding on to her pride like a threadbare scarf. I need your help, she said to Daniel as she sat at the kitchen table, ignoring me completely. They'll foreclose in 60 days. If we lose the house, I lose everything. I served tea. She didn't thank me. She never had. We can't qualify a loan, Daniel explained. Our credit's too tight right now. Patricia waved her hand. Then Clara can co-sign. She doesn't work. She's got no debt. She'll look stable on paper. I leaned on the counter and sipped my own tea, letting her words roll around in my ears like gravel. She doesn't work. She's got no debt. She had no idea. I glanced at Daniel. I don't know, I said quietly. That's a lot of risk. If something goes wrong, it could destroy my credit too. Patricia's head snapped toward me. You owe this family something, don't you? After everything we've done for you. That was it. That was the spark. Everything they've done for me. I had sacrificed my entire identity for this family, my career, my dreams, my peace. I had bent until my back ached, and still they saw me as nothing but a placeholder for convenience. But today I would become the thunder they never saw coming. I set my cup down gently. You know, I said maybe we should talk to someone I know. A private lender. Patricia narrowed her eyes. You know someone? I nodded. I've got a few contacts, but they'll want collateral. Something with real value. Her lips twisted. I have a house. I tilted my head. Not anymore, remember? That's what the bank's after. Daniel looked between us. Clara, if there's something we can do. I opened a drawer and pulled out a sleek manila envelope. I laid it on the table between us. This, I said, is a deed. Patricia leaned forward. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Her eyes widened. It was for a luxury townhouse on the hill, one of the most sought-after properties in Ashland. Newly renovated, market value close to $1.3 million. She looked up, voice cracking. This is yours. I nodded. I closed on it 3 months ago. In cash. Daniel's mouth fell open. Where, how? But Patricia wasn't listening. She was shaking her head in disbelief, mouthing the words silently. This can't be real. It's real, I said. And that's not all. I also own the Strip Plaza on 5th a share in a hotel development in Portland and 3 apartment complexes in Seattle, plus some stocks and bonds. I'd show you the full portfolio, but it would take too long. Silence hung between us. Patricia looked pale, for the first time truly pale. I thought you were just... She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Just a housewife, just a helper, just the girl who married up. I smiled without warmth. That's what you always thought, Patricia, and I let you think it, because sometimes silence is more powerful than shouting. Daniel leaned forward, stunned. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have listened? I asked. He didn't answer. And then Patricia did something I had never seen before. She reached across the table and touched my hand. Her voice broke. I'm sorry, she whispered. Clara, I didn't know. I had no idea. All this time? I looked down at her hand. Her fingers were trembling. For the first time in her life, she was afraid. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't. The next morning, I invited Patricia to breakfast. Just her and me. Daniel had already left for a job interview, a local credit union this time, and I asked him not to mention anything. I wanted one uninterrupted morning. One moment for just the two of us. Not as mother and daughter-in-law, not even as enemies, but as 2 women face to face with all illusions stripped away. I made her favorite lemon scones, honey-brewed tea, perfectly peeled pears. I even set the table on the back patio overlooking the garden she used to nitpick so harshly. It was blooming now, lavender, white roses, mint. I'd taken care of it all myself, quietly, methodically, just like everything else. She arrived looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. No lipstick, no pearls, no superiority hanging off her shoulders like a fur coat. Thank you for yesterday, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. I didn't expect. You didn't expect me, I finished. She nodded silently. We ate in silence for a few minutes. The breeze was soft. A bird landed on the fence and then fluttered away. Finally, I retrieved a slim folder, and placed it on the table beside her cup. What's this? She asked. My truth, I replied. Every investment, every property, every move I made while you thought I was baking muffins and scrubbing your grout. She opened it slowly, cautiously. I watched her expression change with every page: rental income statements, stock growth charts, trust fund balances, business contracts with signatures she didn't recognize but were all mine. When she got to the hotel development prospectus, she let out a soft, disbelieving sound. This is real. I nodded, all of it. But when did you even? Right after you spit in my face, I said calmly. That was the night I opened my father's safe deposit box. She closed the folder. Her eyes were glossy now, no longer sharp. I didn't know he left you anything. No, I said, you never asked. That was the real crime, wasn't it? Not the spit, not the insults, not even the years of humiliation. It was the refusal to see me. She never once asked where I came from, who I used to be, what I might still become. She thought I was beneath her, and I let her think that, until now. I gave up a career in Chicago for Daniel, I continued. I used to have a name in design circles. I had articles written about me. But I walked away because he said his mother needed us, and I thought maybe if I gave you my piece, you'd give me respect. Patricia looked down, ashamed. I made excuses for your cruelty, for your endless tests. I told myself you were grieving or lonely or old-fashioned. But the truth is, you enjoyed having someone beneath you. It made you feel important. No, she whispered. I was trying to protect him. From what I said, my voice rising just slightly. From love, from independence, from a wife who worked harder than any of you ever noticed. She covered her mouth with her hand. I could see the cracks beginning to show, the tears she was fighting. And for once, I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anger either. I felt free. I let you believe I was helpless, I said. And in doing so, I let myself forget my own strength. But now I remember, and you will too. She reached across the table again this time, slower not to grasp but to offer. Clara, she said softly, I'm sorry for all of it. I was wrong. I treated you like furniture, and now I see you were the foundation. I stared at her hand, and then I took it. I forgive you, I said, but forgiveness isn't an invitation. It's closure. She blinked. What does that mean? It means, I said with a small, tired smile, you'll never spit in my face again. Because after this week, I won't be here. She looked stunned. You're leaving? I bought back my father's brownstone in Chicago, I said. I'm going home. I've hired someone to manage the Ashland properties. The trust fund I created for Daniel's future kids will be kept intact. But you and I, we've had our final chapter. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. You don't have to go. I stood and gently pushed my chair back. No, I said, I get to go. I left her sitting there weeping softly into her tea, surrounded by the garden I built, the peace I created, the empire I forged in silence. She would live. She would heal. But she would never again mistake my kindness for weakness. And that was the truth I let her choke on. I left the house at dawn before the sun had fully crested the hills behind the Monroe property. The light was soft, almost apologetic, like the world itself understood that this was the end of something that had hurt for too long. My suitcase rolled softly over the walkway I once scrubbed by hand. The garden looked peaceful, exactly the way I wanted to remember it. As I reached the gate, I paused and looked back one last time. No one stood in the window. No one rushed out to stop me. It wasn't that they didn't care. It was that they finally understood. I wasn't theirs to control anymore. Daniel had come home the night before to find Patricia quiet, shaken, and pale. She had told him everything about the fortune, the investments, the truth she had refused to see for years. I didn't know what words passed between them. I didn't need to. We didn't fight. We didn't cry. We just sat in the living room, two people who had spent years pretending they still loved the people they used to be. He said, I never knew how unhappy you were. And I replied, that's the problem, Daniel. You never knew. He offered to change, offered to move with me to start fresh. But I didn't want a fresh start with someone who had never seen the mold. I didn't want to be loved out of guilt. I wanted to be free. So I handed him the envelope that held the trust I'd set up for any future children we might have had, the last thing I was willing to give. You're not a bad man, I told him. You're just not my man anymore. He didn't fight it. And that, oddly, was the final confirmation I needed that I was making the right choice. I arrived in Chicago that evening to a skyline that felt like an embrace. The Morgan brownstone had been restored to its original beauty, Red brick, black iron railings, flower boxes full of peonies and thyme. My father's legacy, my sanctuary. The inside had been renovated in anticipation of my arrival. High ceilings, white marble countertops, warm oak floors. I ran my fingers along the walls and whispered, I'm home. Within weeks, I was back in the design world, only this time on my own terms. Clients booked months in advance. My name, Clara Morgan, appeared in business magazines not as a side note, but as a headline. Patricia wrote letters, long, rambling, remorseful letters. She didn't ask for money, she knew better. She asked for forgiveness. And I gave it to her, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved to be free from the weight of her cruelty. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's a boundary. I sent her a letter, in return, brief, kind, final. I wish you peace, I wish you healing, but I will not return to a place where I had to disappear in order to survive. She never wrote again. I spent my days designing homes for women like me, women who had once been silenced, flattened, erased. I helped them reclaim beauty in their spaces, their lives. I became a mentor, a speaker, an advocate for resilience disguised in soft voices. I even started a small scholarship in my father's name for young girls in trade schools pursuing construction, architecture, interior design. It was called the Clara Morgan Foundation Building Without Permission. And at night, when the house was still and the city hummed outside my window, I would sip tea in the same corner where my father once read blueprints and whispered dreams. And I would smile. Not the forced smile I gave Patricia all those years, but a real one. A smile rooted in power, in peace, in the knowledge that I had survived the storm and built a kingdom from the wreckage. People often ask if I regret walking away. The truth, I don't. Because walking away wasn't an escape, it was a return. To myself, to my roots, to my father's legacy, and to the life I was always meant to live. Not as someone's daughter-in-law, someone's wife, someone's doormat, but as Clara Morgan, a woman who had been spat on, stepped over, silenced, and still rose silent and unstoppable.